She smiled at my wedding. She had already slept with my husband the night before. The morning of Adaeze's wedding, Chiamaka arrived at the venue 2 hours early. She helped arrange the centerpieces. She adjusted the flower arch. She held Adaeze's hands and told her she had never seen a more beautiful bride. And she smiled. God, how she smiled. Wide and warm and full. The kind of smile that made people feel safe. The kind of smile that hid everything. If you have ever trusted someone completely, and I mean with your whole chest, the kind of trust where you stop locking certain doors in your mind, then you already know how this story ends before it begins. And if you have never been betrayed that deeply, stay close, because what happened to Adaeze will make you rethink every smile you have ever taken at face value. Before we go further, if you are new here, subscribe and turn on the bell, because we tell stories like this every week. Stories that strip the paint off the walls and show you what is underneath. Now, let us go back. Adaeze Onyekwere grew up in Enugu, in one of those quiet streets where the neighbors still knew your name and the evening breeze carried the smell of frying akara from 3 compounds away. She was the second daughter of a school teacher father and a trader mother who woke before the sun and slept after the generator. She was not the prettiest girl in her class, not the loudest, not the one the boys wrote poems about, but she was steady, solid, the kind of woman who showed up, the kind who remembered birthdays without reminders and stayed on the phone with you at midnight when your world was coming apart. Chiamaka met her in their first year at the University of Nigerian, Nsukka, when they were both assigned to the same hostel room. 2 iron beds, 1 window, and a ceiling fan that worked only when it wanted to. They had nothing in common at first glance. Adaeze was quiet and careful, the kind of girl who highlighted her textbooks in 3 different colors and ate dinner at the same time every night. Chiamaka was fire. She walked into rooms like she owned them, wore her hair in extravagant styles that should have looked ridiculous but somehow did not, and laughed so loudly that the girls on the floor above would bang on their ceiling in protest. But friendship is strange like that. The very things that should have kept them apart became the things that held them together. Chiamaka pulled Adaeze out of her shell and into the world. Adaeze pulled Chiamaka back from the edge of herself whenever she went too far. Within 1 semester, they were inseparable. Within 1 year, they were sisters in every way that mattered. By their final year, they had survived 3 failed relationships between them, 2 academic probations neither of their parents ever knew about, a stolen laptop, and a landlady who tried to double their rent in the middle of exam season. After school, life scattered them briefly. Adaeze went to Lagos for her youth service. Chiamaka went to Abuja. But the friendship survived distance the way real friendships do. Not perfectly, not without stretches of silence, but surviving all the same. When Adaeze landed a marketing job at a mid-sized firm in Lagos and decided to stay, Chiamaka made the move too 6 months later, saying she needed a change and that Lagos had better opportunities. She moved into a flat 15 minutes from Adaeze. Life resumed almost exactly where it had left off. Then Emeka came. Emeka Dike was not the kind of man who announced himself. He did not drive a flashy car or wear designer clothes or speak in that particular way some Lagos men had, like every word they said was a business proposal. He was a civil engineer, steady and quiet, with the kind of hands that looked like they actually worked and the kind of eyes that paid attention. He met Adaeze at a mutual friend's birthday dinner. He spent most of the evening talking to the birthday girl's grandmother, making the old woman laugh with stories about his village. And Adaeze watched him from across the table and thought, this one is real. He asked for her number before the night ended. He called the next morning, not the afternoon, not 2 days later to prove he was desperate. He called in the morning, said he had been thinking about what she had said about marketing psychology over the jollof rice and wanted to hear more. Adaeze told this story to Chiamaka that same evening, her voice carrying a lightness that Chiamaka recognized immediately because she hadn't heard it in years. Chiamaka sat on Adaeze's couch and listened and said all the right things. She said he sounded different. She said Adaeze deserved this. She said she was happy for her, and she was smiling. That smile. Emeka and Adaeze dated for 2 years. It was not a perfect relationship. No real one is. There were arguments about money and about time and about the particular Lagos-born stubbornness that both of them possessed in equal measure. There were nights when Adaeze called Chiamaka crying and mornings when she called laughing and everything in between. Chiamaka was there for all of it. She became part of the relationship in the way that close friends do. She knew which restaurants Emeka liked, knew that he was allergic to cats, knew that he and his father had a complicated history he rarely talked about. She knew the private language of their relationship. She held the map of it. When Emeka proposed, he did it quietly on a Sunday afternoon in Adaeze's flat with a small ring and a long speech that Adaeze later admitted made her ugly cry in a way she had not done since her father's funeral. She called Chiamaka before she called her mother. Chiamaka screamed so loud that Adaeze had to hold the phone away from her ear. She drove to the flat within an hour, still in her church clothes, and held Adaeze for a long time without saying anything. Then she held up the ring and examined it carefully and pronounced it perfect, and the three of them, Emeka had not left yet, sat in that small living room eating fried plantain and talking until midnight. Chiamaka became the chief bridesmaid. Of course she did. Nobody else was even considered. Wedding planning in Nigeria is not for the faint of heart. It is a months-long negotiation between love and logistics, between what you want and what families insist upon, between dreams and budget. Adaeze handled it with the same steady precision she brought to everything. She had a spreadsheet, she had a vision board, she had vendors in 5 different categories with backup vendors for each. Chiamaka was beside her for all of it, showing up for venue visits and fabric selections and food tastings, having opinions about centerpieces and arguing passionately for the right shade of asoebi.
There was a moment 3 months before the wedding that Adaeze would return to again and again afterward, replaying it with the particular cruelty of hindsight. They had gone to inspect the wedding hall for the final time, just the two of them, and Adaeze had turned to Chiamaka in the middle of the empty ballroom and said, "I could not do any of this without you. You know that." And Chiamaka had looked at her for a moment, with an expression Adaeze could not quite read, something that flickered across her face too quickly to name. Then she had smiled and said, "That is what I am here for." And Adaeze had believed her completely. The night before the wedding, the night that this whole story pivots on, was supposed to be simple. Adaeze went to her mother's house to spend the night, as tradition required, surrounded by aunties and cousins and the particular chaos of a Nigerian household preparing for a daughter's wedding. There were women everywhere, food in every pot, laughter in every corner, and Adaeze went to sleep feeling like the luckiest woman in Enugu or Lagos or anywhere in between. Emeka was at his friend Jide's flat for what was described as a quiet night with the boys. Small gathering, a few friends. Someone would bring drinks, they would talk and laugh and send him into his new life properly. Chiamaka sent Adaeze a voice note just before 10 that night. She could hear the women singing in the background, saying she was heading home early to rest, that she wanted to be sharp tomorrow, that Adaeze was going to be the most beautiful bride Lagos had ever produced. Adaeze listened to it twice and replied with a string of heart emojis and a voice note of her own, telling Chiamaka that she loved her and that none of this would mean as much without her. She meant every word. Now, here's what Adaeze did not know. Here is what none of them knew, except 2 people. And those 2 people had spent months building the kind of silence that looks exactly like normal life until the weight of it becomes too heavy to carry. Chiamaka did not go home. She went to Jide's flat. She had known about the gathering. She had known because she and Jide had been speaking privately for weeks, in those conversations that start as innocent updates and become something else entirely when the person you are getting updates about is someone you want. She arrived after most of the other guests had left. She arrived when Emeka was sitting on Jide's balcony, a little drunk, looking at the city lights, thinking about the next day, thinking about Adaeze and everything that came after. She sat beside him. And what happened next, what happened in those hours while Adaeze was surrounded by her mother singing her auntie's prayers, would not come to light until after the wedding, after the flowers, after the vows, after everything. The wedding itself was, by every visible measure, a triumph. The venue was exactly as they had planned. The food came out right. The band played the songs Adaeze had fought 3 other vendors to get. Emeka cried at the altar just for a moment, just at the sight of her, and the guests made the sound that wedding guests make when a groom cries, that collective intake of breath that is part admiration and part relief, proof that this is the real thing. Adaeze walked down the aisle on her uncle's arm. Her father had been gone 4 years, and her face was completely open, completely unguarded, completely alive with joy. And Chiamaka, standing at the front in deep wine asoebi, holding Adeze's bouquet arranged perfectly, smiling that wide, warm smile, was the picture of a best friend at her best friend's wedding. She held the train, she fixed the veil. When the officiating pastor asked if anyone objected, she laughed at the right moment, like everyone does, the gentle social laugh that says no one here would dare. She danced with abandon at the reception. She gave a speech that made half the hall cry, talking about what Adaeze meant to her, how she had watched her love and grow, how Emeka was getting a woman that most men would spend their lives looking for. It was a perfect speech, delivered perfectly with perfect conviction. The thing about betrayal is that it does not announce itself. It does not come in wearing a sign. It comes disguised as everything you already know and trust, and that is exactly why it destroys you the way it does. Not just the act itself, but the collapse of the entire world you thought you understood. Adaeze found out 11 days after the wedding. She did not call Emeka. She did not call Chiamaka. She called nobody. She sat down on the kitchen floor, just sat down where she was, as if her legs had made the decision before her mind did, and she stayed there for a long time in the silence of her new home, her married home, the home she and Emeka had been quietly making into something real over the past year before the wedding made it official. She sat there and felt the floor under her and the ceiling above her and thought about the voice note, the one Chiamaka sent the night before the wedding. Heading home early, want to be sharp tomorrow. I love you, Ade. You deserve every bit of this happiness. She thought about the speech, about the tears in Chiamaka's eyes, about how they were real. She was certain they were real, and that was the most disturbing thing of all. Not that Chiamaka had been cold or absent or suspicious. She was warm, she was present, she was everything. She cried real tears at that altar and meant real words in that speech, and she did it while carrying this other thing inside her, and Adaeze could not reconcile those two facts no matter how many times she turned them over. She confronted Emeka that night. She did not scream. She was not shaking. She put his phone on the table in front of him and said, I need you to tell me what happened the night before the wedding, and I need you to tell me the truth. All of it.
The thing is, Emeka had been living with it too. For 11 days, he had been walking around inside his own skull with it, waking up next to Adaeze in the morning, watching her laugh over breakfast, watching her build their life with that same steady precision she brought to everything, and carrying this thing that he had no language for yet. He had told himself it was not what it was. He had told himself it meant nothing. He had told himself so many things that the telling had started to hollow him out. And when Adaeze put the phone on the table and asked him quietly, without anger, without performance, just asked him with her eyes open and her voice steady, the hollowness collapsed. He told her, not everything at once, not cleanly. It came out broken and fragmented, and much of it was self-exculpatory in the way that confessions often are, because the person confessing is simultaneously trying to survive their own admission. But the essential truth came out. Chiamaka had come to the flat. Chiamaka had stayed. He had been drunk and careless and afraid in the particular way that men sometimes get afraid the night before a commitment that changes everything, and Chiamaka had been there. And something had happened that should not have happened, and he had spent 11 days trying to convince himself it was a thing that could be folded away and never unfolded again. Adaeze listened to all of it. She asked him to stop twice when she needed a moment. She did not cry during the conversation. She asked questions carefully, methodically, In the same way she had once approached her marketing coursework, not to extend the pain, but because she needed the whole picture before she could understand what she was looking at. When he finished, she sat in silence for a while. Then she stood up, went to their bedroom, and locked the door. She did not come out until morning. What she did in that room for the rest of that night, no one knows completely. She did not call anyone. She did not go online. She sat in her own darkness and did the thing that people who are genuinely strong sometimes have to do. She felt it, all of it, without running from any of it. The grief of Emeka, which was its own specific grief, layered and complicated by love, and the grief of Chiamaka, which was something else entirely, something for which there is no clean word in English or Igbo or any language she could reach for. Because here is the thing that no one outside of Adaeze could fully understand. Losing Chiamaka hurt more. Emeka she had known for 2 years. Chiamaka she had known for 10. Emeka had been her future. Chiamaka had been woven into her past and present and the very way she understood herself. Chiamaka had been in the room when she received the call about her father's death. She had sat on that same hostel floor in Nsukka and held Adaeze while she fell apart and then helped her put herself back together piece by piece. She had been there for every version of Adaeze, the uncertain one, the grieving one, the ambitious one, the in-love one. She had held the map of her. And she had done this thing. The confrontation with Chiamaka happened 4 days later. Adaeze called her and said she wanted to see her. She did not say why. Chiamaka came as she always did, directly, full of energy, carrying market food in a nylon bag because she had been to mile 12 and thought Adaeze might want fresh tomatoes. She walked through the door of that flat, and Adaeze was sitting at the kitchen table, and one look at Adaeze's face, just one, and Chiamaka stopped walking. The bag stayed in her hand. She did not put it down. She just stopped. And Adaeze looked at her for a long moment and then said, "I know." 2 words, "I know," and they fell into the room like something physical, like a weight dropped from a great height, and the reverb of them changed the shape of everything. What followed was not a screaming match. It was not the explosion that people who have never experienced real betrayal imagine. It was quieter and more terrible than that. Chiamaka did not deny it. She sat down at the table across from Adaeze and she put the bag of tomatoes on the floor beside her and she looked at her hands and she said, "I do not know how to explain it in a way that makes any sense." And Adaeze said, "Try." Now, here is where the story shifts. Here is where it becomes something that cannot be resolved with anger alone. Because what Chiamaka said next was not what Adaeze expected. It was not a deflection, it was not a listing of Emeka's failures or a rewriting of the events to make herself smaller in them. It was not an attempt to minimize. She looked at Adaeze across that kitchen table and she told her the truth that she had never told anyone, not in 10 years, not once. She said, "I have been in love with him since the night you first told me about him." She said it quietly, without drama, and Adaeze felt the floor tilt slightly under her. She said, "From the first night on your couch, when you came home talking about this man who had spent the whole dinner talking to someone's grandmother. I do not know why. I cannot explain it. I tried not to. I watched you fall in love with him, and I kept telling myself it would go away. I was happy for you. I was genuinely happy for you, and I was in pain the entire time. Both of those things were true, and I could not tell you either one." Adaeze sat very still. Chiamaka said, "What I did the night before your wedding was unforgivable. I know that. I am not asking you to forgive it. I am not asking you to understand it. I am just telling you the full truth because I have been living a life for years and it nearly destroyed 2 people, and I owe you at least this. I love you. I have always loved you. You are my best friend. and I betrayed you in the worst possible way because I was a coward and because I convinced myself that one night would be enough to close the chapter, and instead it has torn everything open." There was silence in the kitchen for a very long time. Adaeze stood up. She walked to the window. She stood there looking out at the street below, at the men selling phone credit on the corner and the woman carrying a tray of groundnuts on her head, at the ordinary afternoon going on outside without any awareness of what was collapsing in this flat. She stood there for a while. Then she turned and she said, "You should go." And Chiamaka nodded and picked up her bag of tomatoes from the floor, and she walked to the door, and she paused there and she said, "I am sorry, Ada. I am sorry in a way I do not have words for." She went out and Adaeze heard the soft click of the door behind her. Now stay with this, because this is where most stories would give you the ending. The confrontation has happened, the truth has been laid out. You are waiting for the dust to settle into one of two shapes. Either Adaeze leaves Emeka and loses everything, or she stays and tries to rebuild, and either way, there is a resolution that feels earned and you can breathe again. But this is not that story. Subscribe if you are still with us, because this is the part people rarely talk about. What happens after the confrontation, in the long months that follow, when the drama has emptied out and what is left is just real life and real choices and the question of who you decide to be.
Here is what happened. Emeka did not make any grand gestures. He did not book a trip or buy flowers or write a letter. He asked Adaeze what she needed, and then he tried to give it to her, which meant mostly silence and space and the willingness to have the same conversation more than once without treating repetition as punishment. They went to a counselor, not because their families told them to, not because it was required, but because Adaeze said she could not figure this out alone inside her own head, and she was not willing to make permanent decisions from inside her worst pain. Emeka agreed without hesitation. The process was slow and ugly and honest in the way that processes like this have to be. There were sessions that ended with Adaeze in the car crying before she could start the engine. There were weeks when she could not look at him without seeing the shape of that night, without her imagination filling in details she had not been given and did not want. There were nights when she lay next to him and felt the warmth of his presence and the cold of what he had done occupying the same space at the same time, and not knowing how to hold both things without breaking under the weight. But she stayed, not out of weakness, not out of fear of what people would say, though there was some of that because this is the world we live in. She stayed because she made the decision that love was not something you abandoned at the first evidence of its imperfection. She stayed because she believed, with some effort, with some argument from herself against herself, that what they had built was real and worth the work. She stayed because she was Adaeze Onyekwere, and she had never been the kind of woman who ran from the things that were hard. Chiamaka she did not speak to for 5 months. 5 months of silence after 10 years of everything. 5 months of picking up her phone and scrolling past the name that used to be the first one she called. 5 months of receiving second-hand news through mutual friends who did not know the full story, who said things like, "Have you spoken to Chiamaka lately? She seems off." And Adaeze would say, "Not recently," and change the subject. What she did not know during those 5 months, what she would find out only later, from a different source, in a different way, was that Chiamaka had not been well. The weight of what she had done, the loss of the friendship, the exposure of the secret she had carried for years, and the collapse of whatever she had imagined or hoped in her most private moments, all of it had landed on her in ways she had not anticipated. She stopped going out. She missed work. Her sister noticed and called her mother, who called Chiamaka and demanded she come home to Owerri for a while. And Chiamaka had gone, and she had sat in her childhood home in the town where they both had grown up and tried to understand what kind of person she had become. Adaeze found out because Chiamaka's sister called her. She had gotten Adaze's number from an old contact list she found in Chiamaka's room. Chiamaka had not asked her to call. She did not know she was being called. The sister said, "I do not know what happened between you, and I am not asking,
but she's not good, and you were always the person she turned to. Adaeze sat with that for a week. She turned it over every day, examining it from different angles, testing her own response to it, testing whether the care she felt was real or obligatory, testing whether going to Chiamaka would be a kindness or a confusion, testing herself. At the end of the week, she got into her car and drove to Owerri. She drove 7 hours with the radio off for most of it, with her thoughts for company, rehearsing nothing because she had decided she was not going to go in with a script. She arrived in the late afternoon when the light was going orange over the rooftops. She knocked on the gate of Chiamaka's compound gate. A child let her in. Chiamaka's mother saw her from the veranda and came down and held her hands and did not say anything that needed to be said. Chiamaka was in her old room at the back of the house. She was sitting on the bed when Adaeze came in, and she looked up and she went completely still. She looked smaller somehow, less like the woman who walked into rooms as though she owned them, and more like the girl Adaeze had first met in the hostel in Nusuku, uncertain, a little exposed, without her armor. Adaeze sat down in the chair by the window. She did not cross the room to hold her. She was not there yet, but she sat down, and that was enough for now. They talked for 3 hours. It was not a reconciliation. It was not an absolution. It was not a return to what they had been, because that was gone, and both of them knew it. It was something more complicated and more honest than that. It was 2 women who had known each other through every version of themselves, sitting in the room where one of them had grown up, and telling each other the whole truth for maybe the first time ever. Chiamaka said things she had never said, about how she had spent years managing an emotion she did not choose and had not wanted, about how friendship and desire and guilt had lived inside her simultaneously for so long that she no longer knew where one ended and another began, about how she had told herself so many comfortable lies that she had lost track of where the real Chiamaka was underneath all of them. Adaeze said things she had been holding, about how the grief of losing Chiamaka had surprised her, about how she had expected the anger to be the loudest thing, and instead the loudest thing was something closer to mourning, about how she had stood at the reception desk of the counselor's office 3 weeks after the confrontation, filling out the intake form, and there was a line that asked for your primary support system, and she had almost written Chiamaka's name out of pure habit before she caught herself, and she had sat in that waiting room for 5 minutes trying not to fall apart over a form. By the time they were done talking, the light had gone all the way down, and Chiamaka's mother had left a tray of food outside the door. They ate together in the low light of the room, and it was not comfortable, and it was not easy, and it was not the relationship they used to have, but it was real, and real was what they had left. Adaeze drove back to Lagos the next morning. She did not call Emeka on the way home. She drove in silence again, but a different silence from the drive there. Emptier, less pressurized, like a room after a storm has passed through and taken all the furniture with it, but at least the walls are standing. She got home, she showered, she cooked dinner. Emeka came in from work and found her in the kitchen and said, "How was the drive?" And she said, "Long." And he said, "Are you okay?" And she turned and looked at him for a moment and then said, "I went to Owerri." And his face changed. And she said, "I am not telling you it's fine. I am not telling you any of this is fine, but I am telling you I am still here and I am still choosing this, and I need you to understand what that means." He said, "I understand." She said, "I need you to prove it every day, not with gestures, with the ordinary things, with who you decide to be when nobody is watching." He said, "I know." She put his plate on the table and sat down across from him, and they ate in quiet. Not the quiet of distance, the quiet of 2 people who have said enough for now, the quiet of people inside a rebuilding.
Here is what nobody tells you about this kind of story. Nobody tells you that forgiveness is not an event. It is not the moment in the kitchen where you say the words, or the drive to Owerri, or the dinner eaten in silence. It is a practice. It is something you choose again on the hard days, on the mornings when the images come back, on the anniversaries when you remember what that night was supposed to be and what it was at the same time. It is not a destination. it is a direction. Adaeze and Emeka are still married. Not in the fragile way. Not in the way of two people who have managed a ceasefire and are waiting for the next explosion. In the way of two people who have been broken down to their foundations and built something slower and stronger and more honest in the place of what fell. It took a long time. It took work that is invisible to everyone watching from the outside. It is still taking work because the best things usually do. Chiamaka moved to Port Harcourt. She took a new job and started over in the methodical, humbling way that people start over when they have no other choice. She and Adaeze do not speak often. A birthday message here, a check-in there, the occasional phone call on the occasions when something happens that only someone with 10 years of history can understand. It is not friendship in the way it was. It is something harder to name. A thread still connecting two women who have hurt each other, been each other's witnesses, and chosen, cautiously, imperfectly, to not let the thread go completely. There is one more thing. Something that Adaeze learned months later from her own counselor when she was trying to understand how she had missed the signs. The counselor said, there are no signs, not in the way people imagine. Betrayal does not announce itself in advance, because the person doing it is usually also the person who loves you. Both things are true at once. Love and betrayal can occupy the same person. Loyalty and self-destruction can live in the same chest, and that is not a comfortable truth, but it is the real one. Adaeze thought about that for a long time. She thought about the smile at the altar, about whether it had been real. She had decided finally that it had been, that Chiamaka had stood there in that wine asoebi, holding that bouquet, and loved her completely, and also done the thing she had done. That those two facts did not cancel each other out. That a person can be real and also capable of the thing you least expected from them. That people are not categories. It did not make anything easier, but it made things truer. And true was what she needed, more than easy, more than comfort, more than the version of the story where everything is simple and the villains are only villains and the heroes are only heroes. This is not that story. This is the real one. The one where the person who loved you most in the room was also the one who had done the thing. The one where the smile was genuine and the betrayal was real. And both of those things happened in the same person, on the same morning, with the same face looking at you while you walked toward your future. This is the story of Adaeze Onyekwere, who found out and confronted it and sat on the kitchen floor and drove to Owerri alone and came back and ate dinner and said, I am still here, and meant it. Who did not let the worst thing define the whole thing. Who decided after everything that she was going to be the author of what came next. Not the woman that this happened to, the woman who decided what to do with it. If this story sat with you, if it opened something in you, or made you think about trust or love or the complicated terrain of the people we choose, subscribe. Because the stories that matter, the ones that strip things down to the bone and tell you the truth about what we are all navigating, those are the ones we will keep telling here, every week, without flinching. You deserve stories that respect your intelligence. Subscribe and stay close.